So we're learning more about the Saudi Arabian who shot up the naval air base in Pensacola yesterday. Now, I didn't want to do a video on this yesterday because, we never know really what happens after a shooting within the first few hours. It takes some time for details to come out, for all the good open source intelligence folks on Twitter to do their digging. It takes people combing through this guy's social media accounts and seeing what else was going on and to really give us a better context other than just the event that happened, other than just the facts of what he did. But I'll go through those first just in case you guys haven't heard. The Saudi guy, he shot up I guess it was an indoor facility, like a classroom that was going on. And he killed about 3 people before he was shot himself by an Escambia County Sheriff's deputy. Now, the reason he was in a classroom is because he's a part of some kind of, U.S. Navy international student flight training program. The idea of which is that you get students from foreign militaries to come train with the U.S. Navy in this case, or Air Force, I'm sure in other cases, to learn how to fly in order to foster some sort of international or cross-border relations between military members of allied countries. And Saudi Arabia, being one of America's greatest allies, or at least one of the greatest allies of Washington, not so much a great ally of the American people, they send a lot of students to participate in these programs. And apparently, in Pensacola, it's common for any given class to have about 20 Saudis in it. So this guy apparently bought locally a Glock 45, which is not a 45 caliber Glock. It is that's just how Glock names their guns. They just, they started at 17, and they've been going in order adding since then. But anyway, a Glock 45, I believe, is a single stack. I should have confirmed that, but I believe it's a... Oh, never mind. I just looked it up. A Glock 45 is a copy, or not a copy, but it's a black version of the old Glock 19X, I think it was called. There was a trials gun. I don't think it ended. I think it was rejected by the U.S. military, but it's basically a Glock 19. And I think they said he had an extended mag, so 33-round Glock mag. And this was not something he took from the base. Apparently he went off and bought it on his own, which is, I believe, perfectly legal for foreigners to buy guns within the United States because, of course, the right to bear arms is a constitutional right. It's not some right of citizenship or anything like that. So if you're in the United States, you can buy a gun. You might not be able to take it back to your country, but you can have it while you're here, and if you go back to your country, you can give it away to somebody else or sell it or do whatever. Now, just as a sidebar, old Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York, a contemptible human being, formerly known as Warren Wilhelm III, or was it Warren Wilhelm Jr.? I always forget. Anyway, he called, because this was a privately purchased gun, he said, "Oh my gosh, we have to do something about gun control. Look at all these guns out on the streets. They're killing people." And thankfully, people smacked that down pretty quick. Because, this is ridiculous. You're going to say, "Oh my gosh, we need gun control," because a foreigner who was brought in here by the U.S. military went on a U.S. military base and shot, members of the U.S. military. There's guns around there. And the only reason this guy was here was because, of government power, because the government, was going about its normal business. This wasn't an ordinary American who went out and bought a gun and decided to murder a bunch of people. It's just, there are cases where that happens, but this just isn't one of them. So it was absolutely absurd for, de Blasio to do that. And I don't know if he got ratioed, but he wasn't getting much of a response. I don't think there are too many people taking that seriously. So pretty quickly, the focus in this case shifted towards the Saudi aspect of it. The fact that this guy was a Saudi Arabian military officer who was here to train with the U.S. And betrayed his comrades. And now many people, myself included, are very skeptical of to say the least, of the U.S. Relationship with Saudi Arabia. I think that the U.S. is way too friendly with such a horrible country that had something to do with 9/11 and continues to fund terrorism all around the world. The Sunni Islamic jihadists, the only people who really have impacted the West, the only real Islamic terrorists that give us any trouble, they all tend to be funded by Saudi Arabia, whether it's Al-Qaeda, ISIS, or any of the others. Now, of course, the CIA is also guilty of that, but that's another matter. The point is, Saudi Arabia's royal family, their government, their kingdom, is tied to terrorist attacks committed by Arabs in the West, and this is one of them. So naturally, people jump to the conclusion of, this is because of the Saudi government. This guy was sent here by Saudi Arabia, and he went and killed a bunch of Americans, so it's their fault. And you could argue that it's Saudi Arabia's fault for not properly vetting him or something. If perhaps they could have been able to tell that he was a radical anti-American who wanted to kill Americans. There might have been some way that they could have known that. However, it seems that in this case it would be unfair to characterize this guy as a typical Sunni Islamic jihadist that would be funded by Saudi Arabia. And that's because we actually have a suicide note of sorts in the form of a last tweet that he put out, which was itself a screenshot that looked like it came from the Notes app on iPhone. But before I get to that, I'll get to the Saudis' response to this whole thing. And they, of course, condemned it and said it was terrible and that this guy doesn't represent the Saudi people, that he has, he's a very small minority of people, and it's a terrible tragedy what happened, and blah, blah, blah. And, of course, the one thing I do believe, though, out of the Saudi statement is that they did not want this to happen. And the simple reason for that is that it's not in their national interest. The Saudi Arabia does not hate the American government. That's much more of a populist position. The establishment position in Saudi Arabia is that the American government is good because they're our allies and that they help prop us up. It is true that without the United States support, the Saudi royal family would probably lose power there. So while the government does fund terrorists in the Middle East, they do that for different reasons. To the extent that terrorists funded by Saudi Arabia in Saudi-funded mosques go off and kill Americans, that is sort of an unintended consequence of their actions. Now, they might know that is a risk in what they're doing, and they might say, okay, well, we're going to do that anyway, but that's not their main goal. Saudi Arabia does not hate the United States. At least not the main faction within there. Obviously, there are factions within the Saudi royal family that do hate the United States. And so perhaps you could make the argument that this guy was supported by one of those factions on the inside, but Saudi politics are much too opaque for me to make such an assertion. But, of course, in the case of 9/11, that's generally accepted among insiders. What ended up happening was that while the bulk of, the main line of the Saudi royals and all of the Saudi government is strongly in favor of the United States, the 9/11 attacks were supported by Saudi Arabian royals, just by minority factions. And that's why the Americans that I've talked to who are fans, to a certain extent, of the U.S. Saudi Arabian relationship say that it would have not been correct for the U.S. to unleash its wrath on Saudi Arabia by invading them after 9/11, even though they were the perpetrators and Afghanistan and Iraq were not. They thought that it would have done more harm than good to take out the ally in Saudi Arabia, which, without getting into the nonsense of that whole argument, and trust me, I would love to shred it as best I could. My point in bringing it up is not to debunk it, but to point out that the theory of factionalism within the Saudi royal family is not a new one. I'm not making this up. Back to the shooter himself. What we do know, like I was saying earlier, we do have his final tweet. It was confirmed by the AFP, the Agence France Presse. And it's quite interesting because it doesn't really have anything in there about, Sunni Islamic jihadism. It doesn't say anything about how he hates just how debauched American women are and how they all look like sluts and how he thinks that we have such a depraved society. In fact, I think I'll just read it aloud for you because it's not too long. Oh, American people, I'm not against you for just being American. I don't hate you because your freedoms. I hate you because every day you support the funding and committing crimes, this is not the best English, not only against Muslims but also humanity. I'm against evil. And America as a whole has turned into an evil nation. What I see from America is the supporting of Israel, the invasion of Muslim countries. I see the invasion of many countries by its troops. I see Guantanamo Bay. I see cruise missiles. I see cluster bombs and UAVs. Now that's remarkable. Because there's not a thing in there about how he was, grew up in some radical mosque or whatever, and decided, okay, I'm going to give my life for Allah, and I want to go see Allah, and I'm going to blow myself up. No, this was very clearly an act of political terrorism. He is committing a terrorist act in protest of American foreign policy. This is not, sort of religious terrorism. In fact, I almost chuckled when I was reading it, because he took the George W. Bush line about, oh, they hate our freedoms, and immediately the first thing he said was try to refute that. He said, no, Americans, I don't hate your freedom. I hate what you do. I look at very specific actions of your government, and I say this is evil, and so here I am. Now I'm going to commit a terrorist attack and kill a bunch of people to make a statement about it. This is blowback 101. This is something that the CIA and other government organizations has known existed for decades. It's something that I forget who it was in the Clinton administration, but they said the words that something to the extent of terrorism is a small price to pay for being the global superpower. Because they know when you are the global superpower, when you are asserting your dominance all across the world, when you're sending your troops to every far-flung corner of the world, when you're intervening in the affairs of all sorts of other countries, you're going to enrage people, people who don't like you, who don't want to respect your authority, but of course they don't have the power to actually fight against you in a meaningful way, so they have to do it symbolically. They have to martyr themselves for the cause of anti-imperialism or whatever, and blow themselves up or go and kill a bunch of innocent people just to make a statement, to say, hey, you killed a bunch of our innocent people, so I'm going to kill a few of your innocent people. Now, obviously, is that a moral and good response to bad actions taken by the American government? Obviously not. In principle, what this guy did was no different than 9/11, and in fact, his motivations were the same. See, the problem is with the mainstream media, and they do this on purpose, they never really look at what the stated motivations are of these supposed, Islamic jihadists. In fact, they don't even ever get into the Sunni-Shia split. But most of these guys aren't, the most radical religious guys on the earth. Those guys exist too. There's been a lot of them who have blown up buildings, but they're different kinds of terrorists. Not all brown people are alike. So it's very clear in this case that just like in, just like 9/11, this is a case of blowback. And I have to say, this is remarkable for me as someone who grew up during the time of the post 9/11 wars, and someone who remembers George W. Bush saying, they hate our freedom. That's why they hate us. And me thinking, in despair of, wow, how do we reason with these people? The world is such a scary place. To see someone like this guy come out. He comes out and kills a bunch of people, but he makes a point in saying, oh, wait, just to make sure, just so you guys know, I'm not killing these people because I hate your freedom. That's a lie. The reason why people like George W. Bush and the mainstream media and lots of all the other warmongers want to obfuscate why these guys commit the acts that they do, what the goals of these terrorists are, is because they want the American people to think that these guys are irrational, that they have that they're crazy, and that you can never predict why or when they're going to attack. In essence, they want people to be even more terrorized than they already are. And the reason for this is simple. If you looked at why these guys are committing their terrorist acts, and if the American people found out that these guys are angry and that they are killing innocent Americans because of the actions of our government, well, actions by our government that don't in any way benefit we, the American people, well, then the American people would tell the American government to just knock it off and to say, hey, stop provoking these guys into committing terrorist attacks. They're mad about you always invading Middle East countries? Well, just stop doing that. And then, of course, the jig would be up for the military-industrial complex and the national security state and all the rest. And so that's why they have to hide behind idiotic statements like they hate our freedom. The only way that you can avoid living your life in fear is by trying to reason through the world and make sense of it, to understand why other people do what they do. And so the short answer is, you're not going to hear too many people voicing any sort of ideas that could actually do anything to prevent attacks like this coming again. You might hear a couple people, unserious people, talking about gun control. You'll probably hear more people talking about how we need to not have such a close relationship with Saudi Arabia, or maybe we should ban them from sending their people here. Sure, that's a good idea for other reasons, to stop interacting so much with the evil, Saudi government. But that's not connected to this specific case. In reality, if you wanted to prevent more attacks like this from happening in the future, just like after 9/11, what you need to do is just simply stop intervening in all these other countries around the world and getting involved in everyone else's business. Because it turns out when you do that, people hate you. And so there's no way for the American government to just go around the world and try and drone bomb every person who doesn't like their policy or what they're doing. And so these terrorist attacks will continue to happen. You can't prevent them all. You can try and entrap as many people as you want. Oh, and by the way, when the FBI, just as a sidebar, when the FBI tries to entrap people in these, terrorist sting operations, what do they say? Do they say to them, hey, look at these pictures of American women in bikinis. Doesn't that offend you as a pious Muslim? Don't you just want to kill all these Americans because you hate their freedom to have casual sex and to drink alcohol? No, they never do that, because that would never get any bites. They'd never be able to attract anyone into their entrapment ploys and get them to try and build a bomb. No. What they do is they show them pictures of children who have been maimed in drone attacks and things, and they send them news stories about atrocities committed by the American military, and they say, see, don't you hate America now? Don't you want to go kill some Americans? And they rile these guys up, and they go like, you know what? Yeah, America's evil. I'm going to go kill some Americans to try and make a statement. And then, of course, they get caught in the sting operation. But that's always the details behind these ploys. And so the government, the FBI, the CIA, well, probably not the mainstream media because they're not very smart, but the people whose jobs is to protect us, to defend us against these sorts of attacks, they know why they're happening. And that's the real disgusting crime here, is that they know how to prevent these things, and they're lying to us, and they try and obfuscate just to fluff up their own power, because, of course, if the U.S. pulled back from the world and was not as involved and didn't provoke all these terrorist attacks, the CIA would not be nearly as powerful. So what incentive do they have to try and protect us? The government has much more power if the American people are atomized and fearful. The best thing that could ever happen to our government would be for ordinary people to be afraid to walk the streets at night or even during the day. Just gives them all the more excuses to expand the panopticon. And so I'll end again by quoting that anonymous member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under Bill Clinton, who said that terrorism is a small price to pay for being a superpower. That right there is your answer to why these things keep happening and why they will keep happening. They kill a pretty small percentage of the population. It's not too big of a problem. And so our government, the people who supposedly protect us, have no incentive to do anything about it. So if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do hit subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.